I want to tell you about the day I realized that sometimes the people who call you worthless are actually describing their own future. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning because this story, my story, isn't just about revenge or karma, it's about something far more important. My name is Elizabeth Morrison, though everyone calls me Beth. I'm 69 years old now, and I'm sitting in my daughter Sophie's coffee shop on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. The place is buzzing with customers, the espresso machine hissing cheerfully in the background, and I'm holding an old photograph in my hands. The woman in that picture is 25 years old, wearing a white wedding dress, smiling with a hope in her eyes that she would soon learn to temper with steel. That was me in 1978, the year I married James Morrison. I remember the wedding reception like it was yesterday. James's father, a stocky man with a commanding presence and eyes that never quite smiled, took my hand in his rough grip. "We Morrisons need strong boys to carry on the family business," he said, his voice carrying the weight of expectation. "I'm sure you'll give us a grandson soon enough." His wife nodded approvingly beside him, already sizing me up like a broodmare. I smiled politely, the way young brides do, not yet understanding that this wasn't a blessing. It was a contract I hadn't agreed to sign. James was different back then, or maybe I just wanted to believe he was. He was gentle in those early days, attentive, present. We moved into the Morrison family mansion, a sprawling Victorian house that smelled of old money and older expectations. I was excited about starting our family together, about building a life full of love and laughter. In 1979, our first daughter Amanda was born after 14 hours of labor. I remember the moment the nurse placed her in my arms. She had these perfect tiny fingers and the most beautiful blue eyes. I was overwhelmed with love so fierce it physically hurt. James came into the room and I watched his face carefully. He smiled, but there was something hesitant in it, something that didn't quite reach his eyes. His mother arrived shortly after. She walked into the hospital room, glanced at the bundle in my arms, and her expression turned cold. "A girl," she said flatly, as if I had presented her with spoiled milk. She didn't hold Amanda, didn't coo over her granddaughter the way other grandmothers did. From that day forward, she referred to my daughter as that girl child, never using Amanda's name. It was as if by refusing to name her, she could make her less real, less permanent. James's father was more direct in his disappointment. At a family dinner 2 weeks after Amanda's birth, he looked at me across the table, laden with roast beef and potatoes, and said, "No use this one. Can't even produce a proper heir." Several relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one contradicted him. James stared at his plate, cutting his meat with deliberate precision, saying nothing. That night, lying in bed beside my silent husband, I felt the first crack in my heart, but I told myself it would be different next time. They just wanted a son. That was understandable in 1979, wasn't it? Traditional families valued boys. Once I gave them their grandson, everything would be fine. I was so naive. In 1981, Rachel was born. She came into the world with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire maternity ward. I was exhausted but elated. She was healthy, beautiful, perfect. James's mother didn't even come to the hospital. When we brought Rachel home, she glanced at the baby carrier and said coldly, "Another money loser. Beth, are you even capable of doing this right?" James's father was worse. He started making comments at every family gathering. "The Morrison line, 8 generations of strong men, and it's going to die out because of a defective womb," he'd announce over Sunday dinners, his voice booming through the dining room. He'd gesture at me with his whiskey glass like I was a piece of broken furniture that needed replacing. My son should have married the Henderson girl. Her mother had 4 sons. James started changing then. The man who had once brought me flowers for no reason began coming home later and later. Weekends that used to be family time turned into solo trips to bars and golf courses. When I asked him about it, he'd shrug with barely concealed irritation. "If you could give me a son, I'd want to be home, Beth. As it is." He'd leave the sentence hanging, the implication cutting deeper than any finished statement could. I threw myself into being a good mother to my girls. Amanda was bright and curious, always asking questions about everything. Rachel was stubborn and creative, building elaborate structures out of blocks and insisting they were important buildings. I tried to shield them from their grandparents' coldness, but children sense these things. They notice when their grandfather won't hold them, when their grandmother forgets their birthdays while showering gifts on their male cousins. In 1985, I became pregnant again. This time, James's parents were almost gleeful with anticipation. "Third time's the charm," his father declared. "Every Morrison woman eventually produces a son. It's in the blood." His mother started knitting blue booties before I was even 3 months along, certain that this time I would get it right. Sophie was born in May of that year. She was the smallest of my girls, barely 6 pounds, with these enormous brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. The moment the doctor said, "It's a girl," I felt the room's atmosphere shift. James, who had been standing beside my hospital bed, actually turned and walked out without a word. I heard his footsteps echoing down the corridor, getting fainter and fainter until there was only silence. His mother came to the hospital, but not to congratulate me. She walked into my room while I was nursing Sophie, exhausted and vulnerable, and she slapped me right across the face in front of 2 nurses and an orderly. "3 useless daughters," she screamed. "You're a curse on this family. You're destroying the Morrison name." The nurses intervened, of course, escorting her out while she continued to shout. But the damage was done. I held my newborn daughter and felt something break inside me that would never fully heal. Not grief, but something harder. Something like determination. James's father took it even further. At the next family gathering with about 30 relatives present, he stood up and made an announcement. "I want everyone here to know that Elizabeth Morrison will not be buried in the Morrison family plot when her time comes. She has contributed nothing to this family bloodline, and she deserves no place among us." He said this while I was in the room, holding 3-month-old Sophie, with Amanda and Rachel playing at my feet. The years that followed were a special kind of hell. My daughters grew up hearing constant reminders that they were disappointments. "If you were boys, your father would be happy. Why couldn't you have been sons? Girls are such a burden." James's parents said these things casually, the way other people comment on the weather. Amanda, my sweet, sensitive Amanda, started having nightmares when she was 6. She'd wake up crying, asking me what was wrong with her, why Grandpa hated her. I'd hold her and tell her she was perfect, that she was loved. But how do you compete with the daily drumbeat of rejection? Rachel became defiant, talking back to her grandparents, refusing to visit them. "I don't care if they don't like me," she'd say with 7-year-old bravado. "I don't like them either." But I'd find her crying in her room afterward, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't hear. Sophie, the baby, became almost invisible. She was a quiet child anyway, but around James's parents, she'd practically shrink into herself, trying to take up as little space as possible. James was barely a presence in their lives. He'd moved into a separate bedroom, claiming he needed space for work. On weekends, he'd disappear entirely. I later learned he'd been having affairs, multiple affairs, with women he met at bars. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "What did you expect, Beth? You failed at the one job you had." The breaking point came in 1990 on Thanksgiving. I had spent 2 days preparing the meal, a 20-pound turkey, homemade stuffing, cranberry sauce from scratch, 3 different kinds of pie. I wanted so badly to have one nice family meal, one moment where we could pretend to be normal. James's father arrived already angry about something. He barely nodded at the girls, didn't acknowledge the beautiful table I'd set. We sat down to eat, and I was just serving the turkey when he started. "What exactly am I supposed to be thankful for?" he demanded, his voice rising. "A family line that ends with me? 3 granddaughters who'll marry and take other men's names? This is a mockery. Before I could respond, he stood up and swept his arm across the table. Dishes crashed to the floor. The beautiful turkey I'd basted for hours rolled across the carpet. Gravy splattered the walls. My daughters screamed. But he wasn't done. He turned to my girls, 9-year-old Rachel, 11-year-old Amanda, and 5-year-old Sophie, and he pointed at them with a shaking finger. You 3 are worthless. When you get married, you'll be nothing but water thrown out of the house. That's what daughters are. We've wasted years raising you for nothing. Rachel burst into tears. Amanda, my brave Amanda, stood up and put herself between her grandfather and her sisters, this tiny girl trying to protect her family. Sophie was hiding behind me, trembling so hard I could feel it. And in that moment, watching my daughters being emotionally brutalized by a man who should have protected them, I felt something crystallize inside me. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and temporary. This was cold and permanent. This was clarity. I stood up, took my daughter's hands, and said very calmly, "We're leaving." James's father laughed. "Where do you think you're going? You're nothing without this family." I didn't answer him. I took my girls upstairs, packed bags for all of us, and we walked out of that mansion. James was standing in the hallway as we passed. "Beth, think about what you're doing," he said, but there was no real concern in his voice, just mild annoyance. "You leave this house. You have nothing. You are nothing." I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man who had failed me and his daughters in every way that mattered, and I said, "I'm very clear about what I'm doing. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly." We stayed in a motel that first night. My daughters were scared and confused. Amanda kept asking if Daddy was coming. Rachel was angry, demanding to know why we couldn't just stay and fight. Sophie was silent, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I held all 3 of them in that cramped motel room and made them a promise. "I don't know exactly how we're going to do this, but I promise you 3 things. 1, you will never be told you're worthless again. 2, you will grow up knowing your value has nothing to do with your gender. And 3, we're going to be okay. Better than okay." I had some money saved from when I'd worked as a nurse before Amanda was born. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive part of town. The girls would share one room, and I'd take the other. I immediately started studying to renew my nursing license, which had lapsed during my years as a Morrison housewife. I'd study after the girls went to bed, often until 2 or 3 in the morning, then wake up at 6 to get them ready for school. Once I passed my boards, I got a job at a city hospital, working the day shift. But one income wasn't enough to support 4 people, so I took a second job at a pharmacy, working evenings and weekends. There were months where I survived on 4 hours of sleep. There were weeks where we ate pasta 4 nights out of 7 because that was all I could afford. There were times when I cried in the bathroom at work, exhausted beyond measure, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But then I'd come home and see my daughters doing their homework at our secondhand kitchen table, and Amanda would look up and smile at me, a real smile, the kind she never showed at the Morrison mansion, and I'd know I'd made the only choice I could live with. I never spoke badly about James or his parents in front of the girls. This was crucial to me. I didn't want to poison them with bitterness, didn't want them to grow up consumed by anger. When they asked questions, and they did ask, especially in those early years, I'd say things like, "Your father and I had different ideas about what makes a family valuable. I believe you 3 are the most valuable thing in the world." The girls adapted better than I dared hope. Amanda threw herself into school, becoming a straight-A student. She'd tell me she wanted to be a doctor, and I'd encourage her even though I had no idea how we'd pay for medical school. Rachel discovered a passion for building things, constantly sketching designs for houses and bridges. Sophie, my quiet one, started to bloom. She made friends, joined the school choir, smiled more. We created our own traditions. Sunday morning pancakes, where everyone got to choose one special topping. Friday night movie marathons with popcorn on the couch. Summer picnics in the park because we couldn't afford vacations. These weren't grand gestures, but they were ours, untainted by criticism or disappointment. James called occasionally in those early years, usually late at night, drunk. Sometimes he'd be maudlin, saying he missed us. Other times he'd be angry, blaming me for breaking up the family. I'd listen politely, then hang up and go back to whatever I'd been doing. His parents never called. To them, we had simply ceased to exist. The years rolled forward. I watched my daughters grow into remarkable young women. Amanda graduated as valedictorian and got a full scholarship to college, then medical school. The day she was accepted, she called me at work, screaming with joy. I stepped into the supply closet and cried. Happy tears, proud tears, tears of relief that my faith in her hadn't been misplaced. Rachel got into a prestigious architecture program. She showed me her acceptance letter with this fierce pride in her eyes and said, "Mom, I'm going to design buildings that last forever. I'm going to create something permanent." I understood what she really meant. I'm going to prove I matter. Sophie, my baby, found her calling in business and hospitality. She was always the one organizing our family dinners, making our small apartment feel like a home. When she told me she wanted to open a coffee shop, I encouraged her, even though it seemed like a risky dream. I kept working my 2 jobs, kept pushing through exhaustion, kept building the life I'd promised them. And slowly, slowly, our circumstances improved. I got promoted at the hospital. The pharmacy increased my hours and my pay. We moved to a slightly bigger apartment. The girls never went without the things they truly needed, though luxuries were still rare. During all this time, I heard occasional news about the Morrisons through former acquaintances. James's father had expanded the family business, but was reportedly tyrannical and impossible to work with. James himself had gone through 2 more marriages, both ending in divorce. I felt nothing hearing this. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a distant sense that I dodged a bullet. Then came 2010. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was getting ready for my shift at the hospital when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Morrison," a man's voice said. "This is Robert Chin, attorney for the Morrison estate. I'm calling about James Morrison." My hand tightened on the phone. "What about him?" "I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Morrison passed away 3 days ago in an automobile accident. He was killed instantly." I sat down heavily on my bed. I hadn't seen James in 20 years. We'd never formally divorced. Neither of us had bothered with the paperwork. I felt strange. Not grief, exactly, but a kind of hollow sadness for the man he could have been. "I see," I said quietly. "Thank you for letting me know. Mrs. Morrison, there's more. Mr. Morrison left a will. You and your daughters are the primary beneficiaries." I was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry, what?" Mr. Chin explained that James had left us a substantial estate, the result of investments he'd made over the years. More than money, though, there was a letter. The attorney offered to read it to me over the phone, and I agreed, though my hands were shaking. James's voice filtered through Mr. Chin's professional tone. "Beth, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. It took me 30 years to understand that you and our daughters were my real treasure, and by the time I figured it out, it was too late. I was a coward. I let my parents' outdated values destroy the only thing in my life that ever truly mattered. Amanda, Rachel, Sophie, I am so sorry. I wasn't the father you deserved. Your mother was 10 times the parent I ever was. Beth, you were right to leave. You saved our daughters from becoming victims of the same toxic thinking that poisoned me. Please, if you can, forgive my weakness and my stupidity." I listened to those words in my small bedroom, morning light streaming through the window, and I cried. Not for James, he'd made his choices, but for all the wasted years, for the family we might have been. Mr. Chin continued. There's one more thing, Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Morrison's father suffered a severe stroke 5 years ago. He's been in a care facility ever since, partially paralyzed. Your former mother-in-law has advanced Alzheimer's and is in a memory care unit. Mr. Morrison has been paying for their care, and in his will, he expressed hope that you might continue to oversee their treatment. Where are their other relatives? I asked. That's a complicated matter, Mr. Rao Chin said carefully. Mr. Morrison's father had been grooming various nephews and cousins to take over the business. When he became incapacitated, there was considerable conflict over his assets. The family became fractured. No one wanted the responsibility of his personal care. Of course they didn't. The mighty patriarch who'd spent decades building an empire and treating people as means to an end discovered too late that money doesn't guarantee loyalty. And my mother-in-law, she's in excellent medical care, but she has few visitors. She apparently asks for her granddaughters frequently, though she can't always remember their names. I thought about that woman who'd slapped me in a hospital room, who'd called my precious daughters worthless, and now she was asking for them, her mind too broken to remember her own cruelty. I made my decision quickly. Mr. Chin, I'll ensure they both receive quality professional care. I'll oversee their medical treatment and make sure the facilities are good ones. But I won't visit them myself, and I won't ask my daughters to. Not because I want revenge, but because I don't owe them anything beyond basic human decency. I used a portion of James's money to establish a foundation supporting women who'd experienced family abuse and gender discrimination. It felt like the right way to honor the struggle we'd been through, to turn our pain into something that could help others. I told my daughters about their father's death and his letter. They each reacted differently. Amanda cried. She's always been emotional, feeling things deeply. Rachel was angry all over again, furious that James had figured things out too late. Sophie was quiet, thoughtful, processing in her own way. But they were all successful by then, all settled into the lives they'd built for themselves. Amanda was a cardiothoracic surgeon, saving lives every day. Rachel had her own architecture firm, designing beautiful, functional spaces. Sophie had opened her first coffee shop with plans for 2 more. None of them wanted to see their grandfather or grandmother. I didn't push it. Some wounds are too deep, some absences too long. In 2015, Amanda performed emergency surgery on a senator who'd had a heart attack during a public event. The surgery was complicated, risky, and she saved his life. The news coverage was extensive. Local surgeon saves senator's life. Her picture was everywhere, my beautiful daughter in her scrubs, looking confident and capable. That same year, Rachel's design for a sustainable community center won an International Architecture Award. The building was featured in magazines, praised for its innovative use of space and environmental consciousness. Sophie's coffee shops became the place to be in our city. She was named Entrepreneur of the Year, recognized for her business acumen and her commitment to fair wages and community involvement. And suddenly my phone started ringing again. Morrison relatives I hadn't heard from in decades, people who'd sat silently while James's father insulted me, who'd treated my daughters as invisible. Beth, so wonderful to see the girls doing so well. The Morrison genes really came through. I always knew those girls would amount to something. Strong Morrison blood. We should get together sometime, reconnect the family. I listened politely to each call, and then I'd say some version of, I appreciate you reaching out, but we're quite happy with the family we've built. We won't be reconnecting. Then I'd hang up, because here's what I'd learned in those hard years. Family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about loving people even when they don't meet your expectations. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult. The Morrisons had chosen their outdated values over real relationships. They'd valued the idea of sons over the reality of three extraordinary granddaughters. And in the end, what did it get them? A patriarch dying alone, his carefully cultivated heirs fighting over his money while he lay in his own waste. A grandmother whose dementia erased her memory of cruelty but couldn't erase its consequences. Now I'm here in Sophie's coffee shop, surrounded by warmth and laughter. It's Sunday afternoon, our family day. Amanda will arrive soon with her husband and two kids. Rachel is bringing her partner and their adopted daughter. Sophie's husband is in the kitchen, helping prep for the dinner rush while their twins do homework at a corner table. This is my family, built on love, not obligation, on acceptance, not conditions. My granddaughter Emma, Rachel's daughter, comes over and sees the old photograph in my hand. Grandma, is that you? It is, sweetheart. I was 25, just married. You look different, softer maybe? I smile at her perception. I was softer then. Life hadn't taught me to be strong yet. Is it better to be strong? She asks. She's 11, all long legs and serious questions. I think about this carefully because I want to get it right. Being strong isn't better than being soft, Emma. The best thing is being both. Having a soft heart that can love deeply, but strong boundaries that protect that heart. I spent years being told I was worthless because I had daughters instead of sons. I believed it for a while, or at least I let other people's beliefs shape my reality. That's stupid, Emma says with 11-year-old bluntness. Mom is amazing, so is Aunt Amanda and Aunt Sophie. Who cares if you had girls? Some people cared very much, but here's what I learned. The people who call you worthless are usually describing their own emptiness. They couldn't see value in your mother, your aunts, in me, because they'd been taught to value the wrong things. And that's sad for them, but it doesn't have to be our truth. Emma nods, processing this. I'm glad you left, Grandma. I'm glad you didn't stay with people who were mean. Me too, baby. Me too. Amanda arrives then, with her teenage sons tumbling in behind her, all noise and appetite. Rachel and her family show up moments later. Sophie emerges from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her face lighting up at the sight of all of us together. We gather around the big table Sophie keeps reserved for family dinners. There are 11 of us now, 3 generations of women who were supposed to be worthless, and the partners and children who love us. We're loud and chaotic and imperfect, and we're everything. I look around this table at my brilliant daughters who became everything they wanted to be despite being told they were nothing. At my grandchildren who will grow up knowing their value is inherent, not conditional. At the life we built from scratch when we walked away from wealth and status and chose dignity instead. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret leaving the Morrison mansion, giving up that life of comfort. And I tell them, I gave up comfort, yes, but I gained everything that matters. I learned that your worth isn't determined by other people's limited imaginations, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who should love you but don't know how, that raising daughters to be strong, independent, compassionate women is worth more than any inheritance or family name. The Morrisons wanted sons to carry on their legacy. Instead, they got 3 daughters who built their own legacies, saving lives, designing the future, creating community. They got a woman who refused to let cruelty define her worth. They got a family that chose love over tradition, quality over quantity, being over belonging. And in the end, what was the Morrison legacy? An old man dying alone, a woman lost in her own mind, asking for granddaughters she'd rejected, a family business probably sold off by squabbling heirs, a name that will fade within a generation. But my legacy? It's sitting around this table, laughing and arguing and stealing food off each other's plates. It's Emma asking smart questions about strength and softness. It's my daughters who broke every stereotype thrown at them. It's the foundation helping other women find their strength. It's this coffee shop full of community and warmth. I think about karma sometimes, the way the universe tends toward balance. The Morrisons didn't suffer because I wished it on them. They suffered because they hollowed themselves out with hate and prejudice, and when they needed love in return, there was nothing there. They built walls instead of bridges, and walls don't keep you warm when you're old and scared. Sophie brings out a cake. She's been experimenting with a new recipe. It's lopsided and imperfect, and everyone cheers anyway. That's us in a nutshell. Imperfect but celebrated. Different than we were supposed to be, but exactly as we're meant to be. I raise my water glass, and everyone quiets down. I want to make a toast, I say, to family, not the one you're born into, but the one you choose. To every person at this table who chose to show up, to love hard, to be kind, to the women who were told they weren't enough and believed in themselves anyway, and to the men and children who love us not despite who we are, but because of who we are. To family, everyone echoes, glasses clinking. Later, when most of the crowd has dispersed and it's just Sophie and me cleaning up, she asks, Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed, if you'd tried to make it work? I think about the woman in that photograph, the one with hope in her eyes and naivety in her smile. I think about who I became instead. Harder, yes, but also freer. Tired from working 2 jobs, but proud of what those jobs provided. Scarred by rejection, but made stronger by it. I know exactly what would have happened, I tell her. You 3 would have grown up believing you were disappointments. You would have internalized their poison. Maybe you still would have succeeded. You're also talented and driven, but you would have done it while carrying the weight of believing you were born wrong. And I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let them dim your light. Sophie hugs me, and I realize she's taller than me now, stronger. You saved us, she whispers. No, I correct gently. I just refuse to let anyone else destroy us. You saved yourselves by being exactly who you are. As I drive home that night, through streets I know by heart now, past the apartment buildings where we struggled and grew, I think about worth and value and all the ways we measure a life. The Morrisons measured it in sons and bloodlines and business empires. They measured it in tradition and conformity and control. I learned to measure it differently. In daughters who became doctors and architects and entrepreneurs, in grandchildren who are kind and curious and confident, in a life built on my own terms, however difficult those terms sometimes were. In the ability to look at myself in the mirror and know that I protected the people I loved, that I taught them their worth, that I never let cruelty have the final word. If I could go back and tell that 25-year-old bride something, I'd tell her this. The path ahead is harder than you imagine, but you're stronger than you know. Those people who will call you worthless, they're wrong, and you don't have to accept their verdict. Your daughters will be extraordinary, not despite being girls, but simply because they're themselves, and you will be enough. More than enough. Exactly enough. I tell her that sometimes love means staying, and sometimes love means leaving, and knowing the difference is wisdom. I tell her that she'll be tired, so tired, but she'll also be proud, that she'll cry more than she expects, but laugh more too, that she'll build something beautiful from the wreckage of broken expectations. And I tell her that karma isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just the natural consequence of choices. When you value things over people, you end up with things and no people. When you pour your love into conditions and expectations, you end up alone when those conditions aren't met. But when you choose love over pride, people over prestige, being over belonging, you end up surrounded by family on a Sunday afternoon, holding the hand of the granddaughter you were told would be worthless, watching her eyes light up as she understands her own value. That's my story. That's my karma. Not the suffering of the people who hurt me. I take no joy in that. My karma is this: I was called worthless for having daughters, and those daughters became my greatest treasure. I was told I'd ruined the Morrison legacy, and instead I built a better one. I was supposed to be nothing without that family, and I became everything I needed to be. The universe doesn't always give us justice, but it gave me this: the knowledge that I was right to leave, right to believe in my girls, right to reject a value system built on prejudice and pride. And in the end, that's worth more than any mansion, any inheritance, any family name. It's worth everything.